So what we're gonna do is, this was a broken mirror off a dresser. Instead of throwing these away, or if you see these at garage sales, I'm gonna be turning this into a chalkboard. It's a lot more economical than having to tackle putting a new mirror in or having someone install a new mirror. The dresser that it goes with is already sold and gone. So this is basically saving a trash to treasure. I'm gonna be turning this into a chalkboard. Now, I'm gonna be using Caviar, which is Dixie Belle's black chalk mineral-based paint. Chalk paint, chalkboard. Did you know that you can make a chalkboard using the Caviar paint? And it works I have picture frames, I have wall hangings, I have a lot of stuff made into chalkboards using the chalk paint. So Caviar, you paint it on, and we're gonna be doing that tonight. You do 2 coats of it, and then you just don't seal it. As long as you don't seal it, you have that chalkboard finish. You can write on it with chalk. You can take a wet rag and wipe your chalk off and write on it again. So we're gonna be making a chalkboard out of this. First thing I wanna do though is, I want to paint these outside borders. Actually, no I don't. I'm gonna paint the chalkboard first, then I'm not reaching over wet paint. We're gonna be painting the borders in silk. Now with silk, we cleaned really well first, rinsed it, and then you come in and you do a slight scuff sand. You wanna do a scuff sand before you put on your silk. So you do a slight scuff sand, that's just wiping a 220 grit sandpaper, just wiping it over the entire surface, not sanding, you're just wiping it around and giving it a slight scuff sand. Wipe off the dust and you're ready to go. Now you're gonna see, I'm gonna be doing this chalkboard, you're gonna see this big chunk right here. Let me see if I bring it this way, my little Lazy Susan coffee table. See this little chunk right here? That had a split in it, like a big crack, or like a deep scratch in it. So I put black mud on. You can use any of the colors of mud, but black, since I'm painting black, made more sense. I put black mud on, and I don't know if you can see this big ring that goes around it. I always seal my mud with a clear coat and satin. And the reason I say that is the mud is very porous. And so when you're painting over it, sometimes in some instances, you could have the mud taking whatever you put on top a little bit different than your furniture substrate. And then you might be able to see where you have mud. It doesn't always happen, but I'd rather prevent it from happening from the beginning. So I put my mud on to fill in that big deep scratch. And then I sanded it smooth, and then I do have a thick, or not a thick coat, but a nice generous coat of clear coat and satin over it. You can use flat, gloss, whatever you have on hand. But I have satin clear coat just over where my mud's at. It's sealing that porous mud off. It also helps because I don't want to reactivate my mud if it hasn't been a while that it's been there and drying and hardening. So I know when I'm adding water-based products over it, or I'm gonna be blending, or I'm gonna be doing anything like that, I don't wanna reactivate that mud. So whenever I use mud, I always take a little craft brush and I seal my mud with a satin and I let it dry. Just so that, it's protected and it's gonna be easier to work with. I do that with my 3D stencils too. Before I start blending and painting on my 3D stencils, I seal it with the satin first. Okay, so I'm going to be doing my chalkboard in the middle. And I'm gonna use my oval medium because I wanna be generous with this. Now with a chalkboard, that's all there is to it. You're just painting with the black Caviar. You can make a blue chalkboard if you want to, a green chalkboard. You can use any color you want, as long as you don't seal your chalk paint and you don't sand it smooth to take away the porousness. It works just like a chalkboard. And I've done lots of them. I love doing them. Now I also recommend, I'm gonna go ahead and start painting so that I'm not just talking. I got my water bottle here so I can mist my paint a little bit. I left my lid off for a couple days and forgot. When I apply it, I'm gonna be applying 1 coat in one direction, and I'm gonna get this a little bit damp. I know this is a bleeder. I don't have to worry about this part because the black isn't gonna show the bleed throughs. So I am going to be applying my paint is really thick. Like I said, I accidentally left my lid off. But I'm gonna apply it in one direction, my first coat, and get all the way underneath here. And I'll touch up anything I can't see because of where I'm sitting with the camera. I'll touch up anything later. So I'm going to apply my paint in one direction. I'm gonna get it on. I'm gonna let it dry for a couple hours, and then I'm gonna come back and do my second coat. When I do my second coat, I'm gonna go in the opposite direction. So I'm gonna have some going this way and some going this way. So my first coat, one direction, second coat, the other direction. It just gives it more of a chalkboard look, and you don't have like everything going all in one direction. So I do change directions on my second coat. And this wood is really dry. So I am using water to help this paint spread. And I'm gonna be doing, like I said, 2 coats. Then once my 2 coats are dry, done them in 2 different directions. Once my 2 coats are dry, I can do what's called seasoning. Now seasoning is, I'll have my paint dry for a couple days, and then I'm gonna come in with a piece of chalk. I'm gonna turn the chalk on its side, and I'm gonna rub that chalk all over it so I get a nice soft mist of chalk all over this. Your white chalk, you know, the sticks of chalk that you get for school. And that is what we call seasoning. It helps keep like permanent images from staying on your chalkboard. So let's say you write high in the middle of it. If you haven't seasoned your chalkboard yet, sometimes that high, when you wipe it away, you might see a slight line of the word high, or hello, or whatever you want to put on there. So if you season your chalkboard first by just rubbing chalk all over it and then wiping that chalk off, that helps with that. It's called seasoning. Trying to figure out my water bottle is. So we're just gonna get the first coat of the caviar on. Now I do this a lot with also those dollar picture frames that you get from the thrift store. And sometimes they're missing their glass, or sometimes they're just $1. So I will actually put slick stick on the glass, let the slick stick dry for 24 hours, and then I'll paint the caviar over the glass, and then I have a glass chalkboard. Those are pretty as well. I have several chalkboards throughout my house that I write messages on, and it's just Dixie Belle paint, Dixie Belle caviar. So you can turn any thrifted item, especially these that have like some damage and you don't want to toss them away. This is a beautiful mirror, but not a lot of you want to go and buy a replacement glass for it. Okay, so now I have my 1 coat on, but see what I'm talking about? Everything's going in one direction. I'm with the grain. So now my second coat, this is gonna dry up. I'm gonna go in the opposite direction, and it's just gonna make it look more like a chalkboard, okay? So now, onto the silk. I already put 1 coat of Quiet Cove on here 2 hours ago. You need to wait between 2 to 4 hours between coats of silk. And I'm gonna put my water bottle far away from me, because I don't want to be tempted. You do not use water with silk. But silk has the built-in top coat, has that built-in stain blocking primer. This, you can tell, it's a color that's gonna bleed. So I'm gonna be doing 2 coats of the silk so I can get that protection from that stain blocking primer. And here's the color. Isn't that pretty?
Do you have to seal it?
You do not have to seal silk. No, it has a top coat already built in. Each coat has an equivalent of 1 coat of clear coat built in. So you need to stir it really well as well. I already stirred mine before the live, but you want to stir it really well so you have all that primer and all that top coat built in. You want that all mixed up equally inside your container. Shaking it is not enough. You need to stir it. So the primer's built in, the stain blocker's built in, the clear coat's built in. All I need to do is paint this piece, and then I'd be done. 2 coats. You do not want to mix the chalk mineral-based paint with the silk while they're both wet, because they're 2 totally different animals. The silk is not a chalk paint. It's an all-in-one paint. Like I said, primer and clear coat built in. It is not a chalk paint. So you don't want to be trying to blend silk with a chalk-based paint like Dixie Belle's chalk mineral paint. So I'm going to put the silk on, and I'm gonna let it dry. You need to let it dry for 2 to 4 hours between coats. And the reason being, I might turn around in 15 minutes and feel and touch it and think, that's dry, I can put my next coat on. No, it dries differently too. It dries from the top down, whereas the chalk mineral paint dries differently. So with the silk dries from the top down, so the top might feel dry, but it could still be wet underneath it where it's touching your furniture substrate. So you do want to make sure that you give it that 2 hours. Don't be tempted to try to paint it earlier, because then you know, you are just opening yourself up to possibly having to troubleshoot something. So do give it its 2 to 4 hours dry time in between. And I love using silk. When you paint with it, you will see why they call it silk. It has a very velvety feel when it's applied, and but you don't want to overwork it. That's why it's not really a blending paint. It's more for solid color, one color coverage. You don't want to blend it like you would with the chalk mineral-based paints, because chalk mineral-based paints, we add water to them to get them to blend. We don't want to add water to the silk because it's not the same type of paint. This is my little lazy Susan. I love this little table. But the silk goes on so nice and smooth. You might be tempted to say, I have full coverage. I'm going to stop at 1 coat. Personally, it's recommended that you use 2 coats so that you can get that added benefit of, it would be equivalent to 2 coats of clear coat because you're using 2 coats of the paint. 2 coats of clear coat and 2 coats of that stain blocking primer when you do 2 coats of silk. So it is recommended to do 2 coats. I'm not using any primer on this. That's the nice thing as well. Now, if this was a glossy piece, then you would look at it, and because of the primer that's built in is a stain blocking primer, not an adhesion primer, you would look at your piece. If you would normally use, this is dry and really funny because it's dry wood, so parts is really soaking in the wood and some of it hasn't soaked in yet, so don't worry, it will dry all even like the center area. But if you look at a piece, and no matter what kind of paint you're using, whether it's the chalk mineral-based paint of Dixie Belle's or silk, if you look at it and you're like, that's pretty glossy, I think I would use Slick Stick. So if you'd use Slick Stick with the chalk mineral-based paints, you would also use it with the silk, because the primer that's built into silk is a strictly a stain blocking primer. And I'm going slow around these edges because I don't want to get into that wet black paint and drag that black up into my piece. I'll be much neater on my second coat. But I want you to see what this is going to look like. That's all. I mean, with a piece of furniture, you put on your 2 coats of silk, boom. If that's all you want to do, you're done. You don't have to seal it. With the silk, now let's say you do want that added protection. You do want to use gator hider. You do want to do a top coat just for the sake of the amount of activity that's going to be on it. You can use all of Dixie Belle's clear coats, all of Dixie Belle's sealers, they all work on silk. So if you want to put hemp oil, that's the biggest misconception. People say, well, it's got the top coat built in. You can't use hemp oil because hemp oil has no place to go. That is incorrect. I've tested it, and hemp oil works great on silk. If you happen to have a reason you'd want to do it, you can use hemp oil on silk. And the reason being is the top coat is mixed in with the paint. We're not putting a layer of top coat on top of our paint. So with silk, that top coat is already blended in. When we put on our silk, we put on our hemp oil, it still absorbs into the silk and still works as a sealer. When we're talking about, hemp oil not soaking into areas, if I would put a clear coat of satin on top of here, on top of the silk, that's when I wouldn't use hemp oil, because I'd have a barrier between my silk and the hemp oil. Does that make sense? So no, you can use hemp oil on silk. You can use Big Mama's butter. You can wax it. You can put clear coats on it. You can put gator hide on it. You can do all of that on silk. Just give it plenty of dry time. There you go, a quick and easy project. I took a broken mirror, which would normally be a trash or an item in the trash, and I did a trash to treasure. 2 coats of Dixie Belle's Caviar, which is their black chalk mineral-based paint. That gave me the chalkboard. You just make sure you don't seal it. That leaves it that chalky texture so that it works just as well as a normal chalkboard. I can write on it, put my little message up there, take a paper towel or some type of cloth, clean the chalk off, and change your message. The outside border was done in Dixie Belle Silk, which is an all-in-one paint, so no primers needed and no top coat needed. It is all done. So this was a quick and easy project. I hope you give it a try, and make sure you subscribe and click on that bell down below so that you know every time I put up a new video, you get notified. And make sure you follow me also over on Facebook. I do a lot of live tutorials for free over there, and that's AJ's Vintage Designs over on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So make sure you follow me on all my social media platforms. Okay, well, this was a fun one. This was an easy one, and it's a great trash to treasure. So until next time, I hope you have a great day.